Hey guys, after that last video we have gotten a ton of requests about wet sand and buffing. So we're going to run through it real quick and see if we can't give you a little bit of a heads up on how it's done. Now, there are a ton of different methods or different preferences from everybody. Everybody wants to do it a little differently. What I'm going to show you is what works for us. Doing this for a long time, tried many different materials, different products, different ways of doing things. This is what works for us. So don't shoot me if it's not the way you like it. Okay, so we're going to start with some of the products we use. We use a lot of 3M stuff, specifically because the 3M has the most consistent grain and cut on the sandpaper. Almost every piece you pick up is going to be exactly the same. We start with 1,000 grit, go to 1,500, and then 2,000. One of the things you're going to need is a good squeegee. Prefer something that's kind of soft rubber squeegee. A lot of guys will use like a Bondo spreader, real good, clean, fine one that you can kind of run your hand over and make sure that it's clean every time. So that's something you need, a squeegee. We use rubber blocks, a couple different sizes, a long one and a short one. And basically what we'll do is we will wet sand that surface to remove any of the imperfections in the clear, as well as eliminate some of the orange peel. Now, being wet sand, you have to use water. So typically, I'm kind of old school. I like the old bucket. You know, I use a 2.5 gallon pail taped to the top of a 5 gallon pail, so I don't have to bend over so far. Old, don't like bending over, you know. Anyway, my son, on the other hand, has adopted the old spray bottle, which works quite well. To be honest with you, I won't tell him, even though he's standing here. But this is probably the better method, because that method you're just kind of swirling your sandpaper around inside the dirty water. But anyway, I'm going to take the camera over and he's going to show you how this is done. So we're going to start off with that short block. Going to wrap the sandpaper. Now, I want you guys to notice something. He's wrapping the sandpaper around that, but you can fold that paper in half and then roll it again and get different areas of that sandpaper to use, so you're not wasting a piece of paper.
Generally what I like to do is rinse off your paper, so if there's any dust or dirt, it's clean. Rinse off your surface, so it's clean.
Okay, so we're going to start with 1,000 grit.
You start sanding.
So the 1,000 grit, when you first start, it kind of feels a little on the coarse side, but you're just cutting that top surface. Now, as you're cutting it, you'll hear the sanding, the noise that comes from the paper, and it'll decrease as you go as it gets slicker. But you notice he's sanding up to the body line and not going over the body line. That is very important. You want to stay away from the lines and edges. You can sand up to them, just don't go over them. You want to leave as much material on the edges and the body lines as you can, because it'll end up coming off somewhat during the buffing process. So he's going to sand that out pretty good with 1,000 grit, rinsing it occasionally because the sandpaper does build up with a little bit of clear coat on it, and it can be a little scratchy, so occasionally you're going to want to clean it and rinse it.
Move around here a little bit.
Now, we're not going to go crazy on this. It's basically just to show you, but I want you to be able to see how that surface changes as he goes. When you think you got that cut pretty good, let's hit it with a squeegee.
Give you a chance to see what orange peel looks like for those of you who do not know. It is a common occurrence on a fresh paint job.
Okay, so if you look here, you see here the peel. Now, peel being not exactly a flat surface. So what that is the sandpaper, as it's sanding and going flat, it's leaving the low spots inside the peel there. So you continue sanding that surface until that orange peel is gone with the 1,000 grit. So he's going to hit it again, get a little more out of it.
You can always tip your block up at a little bit of an angle. Don't push hard, don't dig it in there, but it just helps cut it a little bit better, a little faster.
I want you to pay attention to the direction he's sanding. If you go up and down sideways with that block, it has a tendency to float over the surface and not cause a groove, where if you would sand
like
straight up and down like that, it will cause a groove. You don't want to do that. So you're gonna kind of move gently over the whole area. Just choose a small area that you're sanding and move over it.
And I generally go at an angle. I don't go straight up and down. I kind of go off this way. Kind of helps eliminate that running a groove.
All right, so that's the 1,000 grit. Let's go ahead and knock it back down to the 1,500. And give it a little squeegee. Get her cleaned up, and you can see the majority of the peel in that upper area is gone, which is what he's trying to achieve. You see here in this area how smooth it is, it's flat, where over here still got a lot of orange peel at the edge. So you can see what he was trying to achieve with that 1,000 grit. That 1,000 grit has a tendency to cut it flat, doesn't leave any ripples or waves. Now, this is also on a freshly painted surface. This is not by any means something you do on a 10-year-old paint job. It's not starting with this grit. So,
And contrary to popular belief, just because you pulled a piece of sandpaper out of a fresh new box does not mean there is no dust or dirt, so I highly recommend you rinse it off before you try it. Eliminates the ability of any dust or sand getting in there, because, I mean, come on now, we all know that dust and sand gets everywhere.
all right, so he's going to continue on with 1,500. And what the 1,500 does is it's going to remove the scratches that the 1,000 left behind. So each motion you're taking is, kind of conquesting the previous sandpaper. You're trying to get past that
You get
previous grit.
a little squeak sound every now and again, which is dust that got under the paper while you're sanding. Don't freak out. Just stop sanding, rinse it off, rinse your block, and keep sanding. Just make sure you washed it away.
But if you notice, it seems, well, I don't know if you can tell by the movements, but it's gliding easier. So as you're sanding and the paper gets finer and the surface gets slicker, that sandpaper will move considerably easier. Now, some guys will put a little drop of detergent in there, just a drop. Makes it slide a little easier. I don't personally do that, but I've seen a lot of guys that have done it in the past, and it works for them. So our situation here is we are just going through the 1,500 here to knock off that 1,000 grit scratch. And let's hit that with the squeegee real quick. I should have got him pretty close to. Kind of rushing through this a bit, guys, because I don't want this video to end up, 30 minutes long. But here you can see each time it's getting slicker and slicker, if that's a word, slicker. Anyway, we're getting down all that peel. All the peel's coming off of there. It's starting to look pretty good. So now he's going to hit it with 2,000. And the 2,000, it is such a fine sandpaper, it almost feels like you're polishing it, which essentially you are. All this sanding surface is basically polishing. The smoother it gets, the finer it gets, the shinier it'll get. And you'll start to see that in this 2,000. And don't be shy with the water, just keep sanding. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you about wet sanding is that white residue that you see down here on the bottom, that is clear coat. When that clear coat gets into the door jambs and the edges, you really want to clean that up pretty quick because it's hard to get off later on when it dries. So when you're done sanding a panel, I would suggest that you take the time to wipe it out, clean it up before you move on to that next process, because that white stuff, it's difficult to get out.
And if you notice from the start of this video, as I've sprayed the water over it, the water was kind of, drips and stuff on there, but as I've sanded it, it's gotten more of a flow. Just shows how much, smoother it's gotten since I started, just to give you an idea.
All right, let's give that a squeegee, and then we'll step over and kind of go through the buffing process. But I want you to see the difference up to 2,000.
And you can just wipe with the squeegee. You ain't gotta just wipe hard or anything like that.
You can see the reflection in that surface and tell that it is absolutely shinier just with the 2,000 grit. So we're going to move over here to another car that's prior, sanded this prior, just so you can get the buffing process. That was kind of a quick overview of the sanding. Now this is a Barracuda that we had previously wet sanded in all 3 steps. And just so you know, when you're wet sanding these cars, it does take a tremendous amount of time. You're sanding that car 3 times. Just don't rush, take your time, because the surface preparation that you do in the wet sanding will show tremendously in the buffing. There are times when you get to buffing and you'll have to go back and wet sand a little more because you didn't quite get all the peel out. Now, again, we like 3M products. So the compounds that we use, it's basically a Perfect-It series, and there are 3 steps to this. So this is the compound. It's a 360-60 compound. Now, the days of old where the compounds were coarse and rough, those are gone. This stuff today has about the consistency of mayonnaise. It's very smooth. It's done more with heat and chemical reaction. So it's not so much coarse anymore. This is the next step, and you'll notice there's a number 2, a number 1, and a number 3. There's 3 steps to this process. This one will remove the scratches from this, and then this one, the blue, is an actual polish in the end, and you'll get to see that. Now I want you to take note to the color of the caps on the top of the bottle, white, black, and blue. The pads that are necessary to use come in white, black, and blue. So we're going to start off with a white pad. That pad is consistently a little coarser, a little rougher as far as...
They Velcro on too, by the way.
Yeah, they're held on with Velcro. That pad is a little coarser than the other 2. When I say coarser, I mean a little heavier consistency, so it brings the heat up a little faster. Now, buffer makes quite a bit of noise, and it's hard for me to talk over it, so I'm going to let him buff an area, and then I'll explain to you how that surface worked. Typically what he'll do is he'll squirt a little bit of that compound right directly onto the pad, and then we'll touch the surface of the...
Just helps to really eliminate any slinging of the compound. You can see a couple little spots here from when I buffed earlier. It throws it around if you're not careful. So if you really don't want to make a mess, try to wipe it on. It gets on the pad some.
Watch how fast this comes up.
By the way, again, it's a little loud. As you see, I'm buffing. When I come up here to the top, I make sure, because the camera flips it to where the wheel looks like I'm running down, I'm actually turning the wheel off of the edge, so when it spins, it's going this way, so you do not burn the edge of your paint.
And that's holding the back side of the pad off of that corner, so it doesn't rub down on it, it just rubs off of it.
Yeah.
See how quickly that came up, and it's not really shiny yet, but it did come up pretty quick. This is a variable speed buffer, meaning it has a speed range on it. You can raise and lower the speed. When you're cutting, you typically want to do that at a slow speed to start, and you'll gradually increase it a little bit as you go. All right, so I want you to take note as to the reflection. You look in there and you can see Phil's reflection inside that paint. and it's still a little cloudy. So I want you to pay attention to that, so as the next steps come along, you can see how much it improves. The camera's kind of hard to show some of this stuff, but let me give one more shot on there, and we'll move on to the next color. So you can see that's starting to get a pretty good reflection.
I like to use microfibers once you're done with one of the compounds, or even after buffing that section and you want to see where you're at, just lightly brush it off. Make sure that you have a clean rag, because microfibers do tend to pick up and hold on to any dust and dirt that it happens to come in contact with.
Yeah, there's a little residue behind, so you can kind of wipe that off. Now see, this is where it starts to get difficult, because he gets to see his reflection. All right, so while Phil's changing to the next buffing pad, using the next surface, we also have a small buffer, small pads, for doing little tight areas around the edges and, in some of the tight grooves, tight little valleyways and so on. So the air buffer works pretty good for the smaller stuff. But now he's moving to the second compound here, which is the black polish. Now the black pad again with the black top. And what this is just a little finer grit as far as the polish, and it tends to get rid of any of the swirl marks, or actually they're not really swirl marks, they're more like almost like sanding marks, but it's a coarse grit that you'll get from that first compound.
And also, when you're buffing, make sure you keep your buffer moving, up, down, side to side. Just keep it moving, because if you sit in one spot, you will heat up that area, and it will eventually either burn the paint, or it just doesn't do good things for you. So again, wipe it along there a little.
All right, now that's just the second buffing. And I want you to notice how much different the reflection is in that. See how the depth is getting deeper? You can look further into the shop. It's because the surface is getting smoother. So he's going to do one more pass with this compound, and then we'll move to a polish. After you've been doing this for any length of time, you'll end up training your eye to looking at the surface of the clear. You get to where you can't even see color, all you see is the surface. So you're training your eye on that surface to look for imperfections, impurities. so on. So as you're buffing, eventually, like I said, that color just kind of goes away, and you're just studying the surface as you're buffing it. And he's got a pretty good shine on there. You can see the depth in it. But this next step, this is where the magic happens. Now this polish that he's going to put on there has got a pretty unique property to it. The sense of it is a great machine glaze, but you can also use it by hand. You know, you're at the car show and you just want to give it a quick once over. This stuff works fantastic. You know, just to take off any little bit of grime and so on. But let him hit this and we'll show you what it looks like.
And also, for all of you out there that have current projects that are going on in your building, your garage, your shop, wherever it is you're working, if you're going to buff a car, I would highly suggest that you do not buff near any open primer or bodywork vehicles or anything like that, because of the silica that is in this. It will get on there and it will cause fisheye. It will just make your paint job a nightmare for you, that you would have to go back and repair things. So I'm going to polish this now.
A little bit more.
And make sure your wheel stops, or you're going to wear that stuff too, by the way.
All right, it's looking pretty good. I'm just going to wipe it down with that microfiber to remove any of the residue. You can actually see quite a bit of a difference just wiping it down. But I want you to notice the depth in that clear coat now. So you can see clear across the shop in just the reflection. That will show you literally how shiny that is. Now there's a couple things I want to reiterate. The mess from wet sanding, you're going to want to wipe that up rather quickly. That stuff gets into the door jams, the trunk jams, the hood jam, any of those areas and dries, it is a nightmare to get out. You can spray a little water bottle in there and get a little bit of moisture on it, and that will tend to kind of loosen it up a little bit. But as well, the rubbing compound, as you can see up here,
It slings, it happens. You can either take a little bit of the glaze or some water and just lightly wipe it on. And if it puts it on there, it'll take it off. Just wipe it on. And Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off.
But I'm kind of pushy about that, about cleaning it up, because when that stuff hardens, it is a bear to get off. But, you know, I'm gonna basically let you look at this for a minute so you can see the depth. But it makes a tremendous difference when you take your time. This is not a simple process. It's by no means a quick process. You will spend many, many hours. Typically, we get in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 hours in wet sanding and buffing an entire car. So as you can imagine, you're gonna basically wet sand 3 times, 3 separate motions, 3 separate grits, and then you're gonna get into the compound and you're gonna compound this car 3 separate times. Now, cleanup is important, but you're gonna find that as you're buffing, sometimes you'll have an area that's a little bit of orange peel that you missed. It's no big deal to get back into it and wet sand that area to make sure that it's perfectly clean, nice and flat, so that the compound goes over and covers everything nice, and that's what you get. So it's really all about taking your time. There's a lot of work involved, and don't expect to do it fast.
And a little trick that I have learned over the time of doing this when it comes to the cleanup of your buffing pads, which is very important because buffing pads are expensive. Hot water will rinse them out way better than cold water. You don't have to add soap or anything because the hot water warms it up enough that all the stuff will basically melt out of it. And I'm not talking, scalding, blistering, just hot water from the tap.
All right, guys, so I hope that answers all your questions. If you do have any, post them down below. I will try and answer them. If there's something that I missed that you don't quite understand, let me know. We'll do another video to kind of cover it. Meanwhile, if you like the content you saw here, please like and subscribe, post a comment, and we'll keep up the work and try and get you a little more, odds of projects that we do around here, and keep going. So you guys have a good day.